Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Boss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today on a subject that I didn't think I would ever have to address, on an issue that really shouldn't be present in the United States. It's terrifying what its implications mean and how this will affect every single American. And since America is the beacon of democracy and freedom in the world, this is going to have a global impact. We're talking about literally the end of the United States, and that's not hyperbolic. This is not some kind of conspiracy theory. Please hear us out as we take you through this, because we need to have this discussion. And if you disagree, we want to hear your reasons why. We want to be wrong on this. We want to be assured that America will remain the beacon of freedom and hope. But that isn't the path we are on, and we need to be honest about that. But before we get to that, let's take a moment. We want to say, if this is the first time that you are seeing the channel, we thank you and we welcome you. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary here. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you, talking to you on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, DLive, all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to express free speech for wherever you are in the world, for you to exercise your inalienable right to be able to speak, even if your governments do not agree with you, even if the internet overlords do not agree with you. So we ask you to join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time from anywhere in the world, to send us your tweets, your chats, and your phone calls to talk with us about what you think is going on in the world. With that said, let's focus on this very troubling issue. It's currently August 10th. It's about 10:45 a.m. I cannot sleep. In 15 years of doing political commentary, I have never imagined the United States slipping so far away from the Constitution and the amendments, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have gone further than I could have ever imagined. And this is due to the Biden-Harris administration. Not because this is a political Democrat versus Republican thing. This is based on the actions of the Biden-Harris administration. And this is a path we have been on for quite some time. Let's take a look back. We remember, and we have been discussing this, we've been doing political commentary, yes, from a Republican and conservative point of view, but we've been doing this for 15 years, 10 years on YouTube. And what we see here is one of our stories going back to June 29th of 2012. And what we saw at that time is Obamacare. And this was a very contested bill. It was passed in 2010. Americans have always been generally against this and what the bill proposes. And in June 29th, we were making a commentary responding to the Supreme Court, which had upheld Obamacare. The Affordable Health Care Act, known as the Health Care Reform or Obamacare, is one of the most divisive and controversial issues to face the Supreme Court in decades. It's a law that was passed by a single party, with deals and provisions that politicians boldly asserted they never read or completely understood. It has maintained a net disapproval with the majority of Americans since July of 2009, even as politicians that supported the law have struggled to find a way to explain what makes it worthwhile. Over the past 2.5 years, it has continuously been the source of provisions and requirements that are nearly universally agreed to be detrimental and a negative influence on the general economy. Yet the Supreme Court upheld this law. Why? Rightly, the opinion of the majority presented by Chief Justice Roberts denoted that, and we quote here, "Members of this court are vested with the authority to interpret the law. We possess neither the expertise nor the prerogative to make policy judgments. Those decisions are entrusted to our nation's elected leaders who can be thrown out of office if the people disagree with them. It is not our job to protect the people from the consequences of their political choices. Now, we went to that conversation we had back in 2012 for a very specific reason. 9 years ago, because we saw the cracks that were coming. We saw the movement of progressivism in the United States, moving towards trying to get towards a single-payer health care. Now, whether you agree with Obamacare or not, that's not the point. The question is that we saw a very divisive law that gave the government power over the people, that the federal government was able to micromanage individual lives, that your freedoms were limited because the government said so. This wasn't something that the average American was asking for. This wasn't something that the general populace, the majority of Americans, went to their Congress members and said, pass this law. We must do this. No, that was from a very elitist, small portion of the Democratic Party, which would later become the Democratic Socialists and the Progressives. They passed this bill. And they passed it through bribes with other members of the Democratic Party, and a bill so large and so convoluted that many of its parts still, to this day, 9 years later, aren't fully in force and have been rejected, retracted, amended, because it doesn't work. In fact, it would never work. It was never intended to work. It was meant to be part of the path towards single-payer health care. But the thing that's really important about that is the Supreme Court was involved in this process. This was a bill that was passed by Congress, signed by the president, and went to the third branch of our government, the Supreme Court, and ultimately approved. Whether or not you agree with this bill, whether or not you agree with how this law gives power to the government, it went through the system. It is a legal law. And the key thing here is it isn't the job of the judiciary to decide about laws. It wasn't up to the president to decide about these laws. It came from Congress. And whether you agreed with it or not, you could have voted your elected officials out. But it was your choice. And it was our representatives that did it. But it was a growth of power. And that was the biggest concern we had. And that was followed up in March of 2015. We saw that then Speaker of the House, John Boehner, a Republican, had mentioned and stated that on immigration, quote, the president said 22 times, that he couldn't do what he eventually did, speaking about then President Barack Obama. Now, the big thing here is I want you to understand, PolitiFact found this to be mostly true. What was it about this statement in speaking about DACA? This is the deferred action on child immigrants. And what this was about, what was wrong in what he said, according to PolitiFact, who looked it through, is that they found that whether the actual number was 22 or 15 times is up to debate. That's the thing that's not true. And they go on to say this in their ruling. Boehner said, the president said 22 times that he couldn't do what he eventually did. Boehner's broader point that then President Barack Obama said one thing about executive actions, in particular towards illegal aliens and the children of illegal aliens in the United States, but did another, is accurate. But he should refrain from the rhetorical flourish of saying Obama said it 22 times. Who cares if he said it 22 times? The core element is we had Barack Obama say to the American people multiple times that the president does not have the power to effectively create law, to bypass the Congress, to usurp the power of the Supreme Court, and to just pass laws based on his political preferences. his ideology and his political agenda. And that's a core tenet of the United States. The president doesn't get to create law, even with executive orders. That is a problem. And that's something that the constitutional lawyer, Barack Obama, understood and had said from 2008 until 2015, repeatedly, 2012, had repeatedly said that he can't create law, that he couldn't create a path to citizenship for illegal immigrants or the children of illegal immigrants until he decided he could. And then he did. And that's a problem because that's another domino falling down. We have, as we're showing you, in 2010, Obamacare was created, giving the government priority over the individuals, the American citizens, on their private lives, your private health care. Then in 2015, we're seeing, again, 2014, we're seeing that President Obama is using executive orders to create law, to circumvent the Congress, to circumvent the will of the people because he wanted to, because he had a political agenda, because progressives were growing in power in the Democratic Party and they wanted to become more socialist. And again, it's not whether or not you think DACA should or shouldn't exist. It's not a question of whether or not the children of illegal immigrants who've been in the United States since they were virtually born. That's not the question. That's not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is we have an overreach of our government. And in reaching beyond its power, it destroys the power of the individuals in America, the citizens. It destroys our freedom one by one, giving more power to a government and less power to the people, less choice and less freedom. And each president and each year of each president in their term after this fact are able to abuse this more and more. Let's keep going forward in time. How about we go to almost exactly 2 years ago, August 17th of 2019. Andy Ngo, a reputable newsman, was reporting on a middle-aged man was maced and beaten by an Antifa mob. He was knocked unconscious to the ground. His partner or spouse was trying to protect him as the mob still surrounded them. There are no police. The Portland protests. This is before 2020. This is before the George Floyd protests. This is before anyone was, before this nation became divided on race. Before the Democrats jumped in and said, hey, it's all about race. Before the progressives and the socialists were able to move forward in a large way, their intersectional gender identity politics and critical race theory. Even back in 2009, we were seeing that the most violent wing of the Democratic Party, a splinter, absolutely, but yet still a part of the Democratic Party, part of that progressive movement, were willing to use violence, extreme violence. And in Portland, it was excused. Democrats had nothing to say about it. It was something that they ignored completely. In fact, going a year later, in July 27th of 2020, even though by that time we had already seen autonomous zones in Seattle, in Portland, Austin, Atlanta, New York City, all across this nation, even though we had seen people murdered like Jessica Dottie Whitaker, like we had seen with the 8-year-old child in Atlanta, the 16-year-old in Seattle at the Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, even though we had seen someone targeted and murdered by Antifa simply because they had a different political belief. After all of that, Representative Jerry Nadler said that Antifa and their violence in Portland is a myth, that it didn't exist. And this was on Twitter. It was on video. This is from congress.gov, as reported by the Washington Times. Representative Gerald Nadler declared Sunday it's a myth that Antifa provocateurs are behind the ongoing violent protests in Portland, Oregon. You know, those protests lasted for 120 days. 120 days. The CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which is an insurrectionist zone. It is illegal at every level, whether it's the local, state, or federal level. That Capitol Hill zone existed for over 30 days before a child was killed. This all happened and Jerry Nadler knew it. Democrats knew it. And their answer was, it doesn't exist. It's not real. Don't worry about it. That should terrify people. Because again, what are we seeing here? Obamacare puts the government over the people. DACA gives the executive more power than it should ever have to be able to institute laws based on political preference and political agenda, regardless of what the Congress actually believes in and what the Congress is willing to do. We have members of that Congress who are unwilling to admit the actual evidence that we see of violence against American citizens based on their political beliefs because of an agenda of a splinter group. And literally, the progressives, the Democratic Socialists, they're a splinter. It's estimated somewhere around 7 to 10% of the Democratic Party are actually Democratic Socialists or progressives. These are small groups of people, and Antifa is an even smaller splinter of that group who are absolutely violent. And we know this for a fact because we've seen this over and over again. Here we go. This is from March 10th of 2021. And we know that these autonomous zones continue to exist for over a year. In fact, what we were saying at the time, that's not true. Because here we go. This is a video that many people may have seen, but most people did not see, which is that there is an autonomous zone at the George Floyd Memorial. This has existed from 2020, from back in June of 2020. And it continues to exist today. And this is, as you can see here, and all the links will be in the description afterwards, where you can see these are individuals who are threatening an assault against a member of the press, who have refused to allow the police in to this zone with all those homes, all those individuals, whether they agree or not, are being held accountable. They are basically kidnapped. And this is an area that has denied the powers of the election, the laws and legislation that we all live by. Can you imagine that? That's an autonomous zone. That's an example of just one of many of the autonomous zones we saw from June of 2020 going on to almost this day in 2021. And it's terrifying because, again, it's another domino that's falling. We see Obamacare with the overreach of the government. We see DACA and the executive orders under the Obama administration overreaching the power of the government. Taking each of these cases, taking it away from the citizens. We see representatives denying the violence that is persecuting American citizens unfairly and unlawfully, harming American citizens for having the freedom to speak. The First Amendment, free speech. How this does not chill the free speech to know that there are radical fringe groups going around attacking people. And as we got to find out in the summer and the fall and the winter of 2020, they were willing to kill people, as we saw many times in Dallas, in Austin, in Portland, in Seattle, in Atlanta, Indianapolis. We saw people dying everywhere because of these autonomous zones, because of these riots, because of these radicals. That's incredibly important to keep in mind. And it just gets worse and worse. And it's another domino falling because now our free speech is being chilled. We're not able to speak out freely because there are these roving bands of brigands that are trying to enact violence against those who don't agree with them. It gets even worse because we know that even in May 25th of 2021, we were speaking about it even then. In fact, as we speak today, earlier today, we see that there was breaking news, that there was a drive-by shooting caught on live TV at George Floyd Square, an autonomous zone that was created shortly after the death of George Floyd, something that violates the local, state, and federal laws, and lawlessness continues unabated. Even as we see on this day of celebration for progressives and socialists, we see that there were at least 30 shots fired, caught live. And we know that was 30 shots. It was from the AP Global Media Services under a reporter by the name of Philip Crowther, who reported hearing as many as 30 gunshots about a block east of the intersection that he was taping at. A window storefront was shot out, and police believe there was an individual that did not die but was in critical condition shortly after the event. Can you imagine that? And this is the insurrection that is growing in the United States. The true insurrection, the true violence. We know that the riots that were associated, not mostly peaceful protests, like CNN would tell us, like MSNBC told us, even as they had pictures of arson, of buildings burning down right behind the reporter, even as people are rioting in the streets, and they promised us it's mostly peaceful. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Even as Jerry Nadler denies the violence that we have seen and the destruction that we have seen. When we know that over $2 billion, more than $2 billion in damages were created, destruction of businesses, homes, infrastructure, destroying neighborhoods of poor people and black people in particular, destroying these areas for decades to come. Over $500 million of damage just in Minneapolis alone, not counting the deaths that occurred, not counting things like the drive-by shooting that is being captured on live TV in these autonomous zones that are breaking every local, state, and federal law. And that's okay, because Democrats didn't even want to speak about it. They didn't even want to mention it. In fact, what they told the American people was that, don't worry, we just need to defund the police. The answer to these takeovers, this hostage taking, this kidnapping of American citizens in their homes and in their neighborhoods, this destruction of property and businesses and lives, the answer to that was, well, get rid of the police. Have less police officers. And also, let's pass criminal reform, criminal bail reform, and release from jail these criminals who have committed these crimes, and just send them back out into the streets, let them go on their way, and on the basis that they promise that they'll show up for their trials, which never actually happened, because those very same Democrats in city after city under their district attorneys just waved away those crimes. What was it? In New York City, 3,500 criminal arrests resulted in 200 people being charged and convicted, and the rest of the charges were just gone. They just got waved away. They didn't exist. And again, this is another domino where we're seeing a chilling effect on the First Amendment. We're seeing a chilling effect on our privacy, on our right in our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness being destroyed step by step as the government becomes more and more powerful. You don't have a right, according to H.R. 127 and Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, you don't have a right to own a firearm. We see the ATF nominee, David Chipman, today is speaking about how you shouldn't have a rifle, a semi-automatic rifle, because he thinks it's an assault weapon and you don't deserve to have it because you could be dangerous. Meanwhile, At the same time, autonomous zones exist in 22 cities around America. Everywhere that they have defunded the police, which were all in Democratic-run cities, we see skyrocketing violence. We see more murder. We see more homicides at record-breaking levels in some of these cities. This is a half-century-old record. Groundbreaking amounts of violence against American citizens. The Democrats say it doesn't exist. It just didn't happen. They don't believe it. It's not real. Even though it's being done by members of their own party. And that's dangerous. And again, another domino falls. You have less protection for yourself. You can expect less protection coming from your cities and your states who are there. Their first and primary reason for existing is to protect the people. And more power is being put into the hands of the elite few. And that brings us to, remember, this is all happening at the same time that Nancy Pelosi, as we have reported previously, is trying to expand the U.S. Capitol Police, to put them into all of the 50 states, to duplicate the job of the FBI, the Secret Service, the Treasury, your local and state police and law enforcement agencies. And they don't answer to anyone except Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. This is essentially a secret police. Again, another domino that we've reported on that is falling down. And it's adding to what we see in 2012, in 2015, in 2019, in 2020. And now here we are in 2021. And that brings us to August. In August, we see that there's an eviction crisis. Now, we want to be clear. We have been talking about the eviction crisis since November of 2020. And we were upset with Republicans at that time because they were kicking the can down the road and not addressing an issue that potentially was facing some 14 million Americans. And they pushed it down the road to January 1st. So they would answer it later. And then we saw the Biden administration kick it down the road to March and then pushing it down to July. And now here we are in August. That kicking down the road, that kicking the can, which was directed by the CDC. Well, we saw the Supreme Court came out. They made it very clear. This isn't legal. This is something that Congress needs to do. The CDC is not an agency of the federal government. It's not part of the executive branch. It's not part of the legislative branch. It's not part of the judicial branch. They're not elected by the United States citizens. They're appointed by whichever political party happens to be in power at the time. They don't answer to the American people, and they don't create law. Their guidances are exactly that, a guidance. And it is up to the Congress, which answers to the people. Remember, this goes back to what we heard directly from Chief Justice Roberts. What did he say? And I want to be clear what he said here. It is not our job to protect the people from the consequences of their political choices. Those decisions are entrusted to our nation's elected leaders, who can be thrown out of office if the people disagree with them. It is a decision for Congress to be able to affect the lives of the citizens. And slowly but surely, we have seen that eroded. And we have seen the executive branch, we have seen elitists in our government take more and more power, like Nancy Pelosi, who on August 1st, having completely failed to address the eviction crisis that is going to affect 14 million Americans, knowing full well since November of 2020 when she was in Congress, knowing full well that she had to do something, that this was an issue in front of them. And Congress, from November of 2020 going forward, all the way to August 1st, did nothing. They let this fail. Democrats did not pass. They control the House. They control the Senate. They control the presidency. They can pass a law. They could have passed something to get it done, but they didn't. And then we saw that representatives, progressive lawmakers, including Representative Cori Bush, Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, otherwise known as the Squad, each of them democratic socialists, individuals who believe in socialism, not the systems of representative democracy that we have in the United States now. These are individuals who want to change America. They want to break the Constitution. They want to put in new laws. These individuals urged the Biden administration to maintain a ban on the eviction moratorium, to support the CDC, and to give power to the CDC, an agency of the government, to create law. That's insane. And it should be considered insane. Not just because it's a bunch of elitists. Forget the fact that they're democratic socialists. Forget the fact that they want to destroy the system that exists right now. Forget the fact that they want to introduce communism and socialism into the United States. That's not important. What is important is we're seeing yet another domino fall, where another group that has no accountability to the American people suddenly has rose up and gained power. The CDC is now telling people how to live their lives. The United States government, through its various agencies, is micromanaging your life, telling you when you can and cannot go out of your home, telling you where you can live and how you can work, and determining whether or not it's legal for you to pay rent, to pay your mortgage, to actually justify why you live where you live, breaking our economic system. You know, there was a statement on August 2nd, after Nancy Pelosi kicked the can back to the Biden administration, after the Squad, Cori Bush, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Anna Pressley, who did nothing, each and every one of them were in power, were in office back in November of 2020. Not one of them did anything to move this forward, to protect their constituents who they represented. No, they then said, break the law. Break the law. You know that this is something the Constitution does not allow. You've been told by the Supreme Court. Do it anyway. Nancy Pelosi is advocating for the violation of the Constitution. Speaker of the House wants to break the law, to break the Constitution. And that led us to Jen Psaki, the press secretary for the Biden-Harris administration. She mentions on August 2nd, today, President Biden is taking further action to prevent Americans from experiencing the heartbreak of eviction. Thanks to state eviction moratoria, almost a third of the country will be spared evictions for the rest of this month. Well, first of all, it's not a third of the nation. There are 350 million people in America. 100 million people are not facing eviction. Based on all the studies from colleges and all the reports, somewhere between, even listening to Cori Bush, Anna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're talking about 7 million people that possibly could be evicted from their homes. Looking at the studies, you're looking at 14 million people that are at risk of having an eviction or a foreclosure, not a third of the nation. Already, the Biden administration, they're hyping this to increase fear, to make people think that 1 out of 3 people will lose their homes. They will lose a place to stay. They will become homeless. That's not true. No one has said that except the White House. They go on to say, thanks to the bipartisan COVID Relief Act Congress passed in December of 2020, which would be under President Trump, not the Biden administration. And the American Rescue Plan, Congress and the Biden administration enacted March 2021, which has its own issues. State and local governments long ago received emergency rental assistance. a $46.5 billion plan to protect millions of Americans facing deep rental debt and potential eviction during the pandemic. If there's $46 billion, of which we know for a fact only $3 billion of that has actually been given to people facing eviction and landlords, then Congress failed. The Biden administration failed. They are ineffective. They are inept. That's what they're saying there. The money's there and no one's getting it. That is a problem. This is the Biden administration. This is their plan, and their plan failed. They failed to execute it. That is inaction, but it's not their fault. As the Biden-Harris administration made clear last week, there is no excuse for any state or locality not to promptly deploy the resources that Congress appropriated to meet the critical needs of so many Americans. Except there is an excuse, because it didn't happen. Well, maybe not an excuse, but there is blame. And it's not just to Congress. This is the Biden administration's plan. It's their money that they issued. They should be watching this. They should be oversight on this. They didn't. They dropped the ball. They didn't care. Just like Congress didn't care. They let this go. They knew $46 billion was available and $3 billion was used, and there was a gap and time was running out, and they didn't care. According to the White House, they go on to say, no one in America should be evicted when federal funds are available in the hands of state and local government to pay back rent that's due. Well, then why didn't the Biden administration make a public statement before the time limit was up? Why didn't Congress, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, stand up and get onto the national news media and say, this is something that we need to address? Why didn't they put pressure on Governor Andrew Cuomo, Governor Newsom, Governor Whitmer, Governor Wolf? Why didn't they put pressure on them to get this money moving forward, to address the problem and fix it? Because they didn't care. Because the government didn't want to bother with the American people. They had bigger issues to deal with. So last week, the administration also made clear that given the spread of the Delta variant among those Americans most likely to face eviction and lacking vaccinations, the president would have strongly supported a decision by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to further extend its eviction moratorium to protect renters at this moment of heightened vulnerability. The executive branch, the Biden-Harris administration, is giving power to a government agency that doesn't deserve it, that doesn't have that power, and they are empowering them to make law that happens to fit the political agenda of the Biden administration. They go on to say, unfortunately, the Supreme Court declared June 29th that the CDC could not grant such an extension without clear and specific congressional authorization. So we know from the Supreme Court, one of the three branches of government of the United States, you can't do this. It is illegal. Given the rising urgency of containing the spread of the Delta variant, on Sunday, the president asked the CDC to consider once again the possibility of executive action. They don't have that power. The CDC doesn't have executive power. They can't pass an executive order. They can't create law. They're not part of the executive branch. They're not part of the legislative branch. They are absolutely not part of the judicial branch. We have just seen the Supreme Court say they can't do that. And the Biden administration went right back to them and said, pass a law anyway. Under pressure from, this is according to Yahoo News, on August 4th, 2 days after, Joe Biden said, hey, CDC, it's on you. Pass a law. Under pressure from progressive lawmakers like Cori Bush, the CDC extends eviction moratorium. So an agency of the United States government that has no power over the people cannot make law. Listening to a political faction, a splinter of the Democratic Party, a splinter group in the United States, the Democratic Socialists of America, taking their lead from that minority of individuals, they decided to pass a new law and said, hey, there's going to be an eviction moratorium until October 3rd. And they know it's against the law. They know this is illegal. They know, they have been told. Biden has said it clearly, much like Obama back on March of 2015, as he said at 22 times, you can't do this. This is beyond the power of the presidency, and they did it anyway. Now it's members of Congress of the Democratic Socialists of America, socialists directing agencies in the government to have power over the American people. You have no freedom. The Constitution is broken. Rochelle Walensky had, and this is from the Wall Street Journal on August 4th, Dr. Walensky's own data showed that the times are much less desperate than they used to be. Her CDC website reports that the 7-day average of daily COVID deaths in the United States had fallen in half since her March declaration about her heartfelt feeling, and has tumbled roughly 90% from the peak levels early in January. This was August 4th, 6 days ago. The numbers were down. But there was fear. There was a feeling in the CDC. Dr. Rochelle Walensky is the director for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. And she had a feeling, not data, not science, not evidence. She, to quote the things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't care about, she wasn't worried about being factually correct. She wasn't worried about being explicitly correct or grammatically correct or empirically correct. She had a feeling. Dr. Rochelle Walensky had a feeling. And that feeling, with the help of the progressive movement, the socialists in America, decided to create law. And the Biden administration empowered them to do so, against the wishes of one of the branches of government, where they are told it's explicitly not possible. Looking at even more coverage on this, the Biden administration announces new targeted eviction moratorium for many renters that'll expire on October 3rd. And again, what we see the news media telling us at that time, Jen Psaki, speaker for the Biden administration, the press secretary, stated on Tuesday that the administration was considering installing a partial, limited, short-term extension. It doesn't matter how long the extension is. It doesn't matter if it lasts 15 years or if it lasts 15 minutes. It's illegal. It is expressly beyond the power of the executive branch. It is beyond the power of the United States government. It cannot be done. It doesn't matter how long it gets done for. And Biden knows this. In fact, when we go to the AP News on August 5th, 5 days ago, Joe Biden is stating, at the very least, as Biden himself said, the new moratorium will buy some time to protect the estimated 3.6 million Americans who could face eviction from their homes. So essentially what we're looking at is the Biden administration is saying they're more than willing to break the law, that they will violate the Constitution, the amendments. They will empower and create new agencies with immense powers to affect the individual lives. They will micromanage American lives. And it's okay. And their thing is, we're going to see what we can get away with until we get called out. We're going to break the law until we get caught. Can you see why I'm awake? Why I've stayed up? Because this is terrifying. This is a path we have seen the United States government going on. And it goes back to before 2012. But it definitely is something we've seen with Obamacare, with DACA, with the riots, ANTIFA, and the autonomous zones, the insurrectionist autonomous zones, time after time after time, we've been seeing that our rights and our freedoms are being destroyed piece by piece. That the government is taking more and more control, and there is less democracy in the United States. Because your First Amendment rights are being chilled. Your Second Amendment rights are being thrown away. Your Fourth Amendment rights don't exist. In fact, it's not limited to just that. There's even the Third Amendment that's being affected. Something that most people don't even realize. The Third Amendment, by the way, actually says, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. And why does that matter? Because there is a lawsuit right now that is going in place from the Alabama Association of Realtors against the United States Department of Health and Human Services. And they state that given the size of the population at issue, some of these tenants are bound to be soldiers, to the extent that the CDC moratorium prohibits evicting a soldier. It runs afoul of the Third Amendment. Again, the Third Amendment says, no soldier shall, in a time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. That's exactly what the CD says. That if the owner wants you to leave, you're getting evicted. You can't evict that soldier, according to the CDC. This constitutionally significant issue warrants this court's attention. So we see the Biden administration is breaking the Third Amendment and just disregarding the third branch of government, the Supreme Court. They're trying to play a game. And the game is, oh, aren't you emotionally involved? Wouldn't it be terrible to just evict people? More people, and we're going to claim there's more people who are potentially going to be evicted than actually are going to be evicted. We're going to multiply this number to 100 million Americans when the real number is somewhere between 7 to 14 million Americans, which is hyping the situation because you are afraid and you're concerned, but you're not concerned about the big issue. You're worried about a different issue. And I understand no one should be homeless. I've been homeless. I'm an advocate to end homelessness. I work on that every year locally in my local community. So I understand what it is. I've been homeless. I get it. But I also understand that if we do not have the freedom to speak, if we have the government micromanaging our lives, if agencies that have no power are suddenly given power to create law in effect, and they are being goaded on and guided by a splinter group of political elites whose objective is to destroy the representative government that we have right now and institute a new government that they like and prefer, that the majority of Americans do not agree with. Democrats overwhelmingly are not progressives. They do not agree with socialism. They're not democratic socialists overwhelmingly. Then what are we looking at? In effect, we're looking at the destruction of America. The dominoes are falling piece by piece. And this should be the only news talked about in America right now. This should be headline news. There should be massive pressure against the Biden-Harris administration. And they should be very clear in trying to explain why they are willfully and actively breaking the law. They're breaking the Constitution. They're breaking our government. I understand. This is a path the Democrats have been on for a decade, actually longer. And I understand Republicans have not stood up strongly enough against this because they're afraid of people saying, well, you don't care about people being evicted. Well, that's fine. If you're not evicted and you have no freedom, what's the greater loss? If you have no ability to speak, if you have no ability to choose your life and how your life will be run, if everything has to go through the United States, through a government and its various agencies who are bending over to the whims of a fraction, a small, tiny group of individuals, then what's the point? Oh, you have a house, but you have no freedom. You can't make any choices, but you have somewhere to stay. As long as that same elitist group, that fractional group of politicians, as long as they're happy, as long as they're pleased with you, as long as you have not offended them, as long as you are being a proper serf, a peasant to their neo-noble wills and whims, then you have a place to stay. But what happens on the day that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Anna Presley, Cori Bush, what happens when they decide, well, I don't like you because you have the wrong political beliefs, because you don't agree with me, because you don't want America to be socialist? Do you still get to keep your home? What happens when they go to the CDC and say, well, we want to exclude certain people, and we're only going to allow and make sure that certain people are going to be taken care of? What if they come out and the CDC gets rejected again, as they will, as many of the attorneys are saying right now? In fact, going back to the AP News, we can see, even though we've heard Biden say, well, there's lawyers who say that this is worth trying. No, it's not. Because the Supreme Court's already told us it's breaking the law. It's breaking the Constitution and our government. We have Ilya Somin out of George Mason University who says, meet the new moratorium, same as the old moratorium. It's the same problem. She voted for Biden. How about Nicholas Bagley of the University of Michigan, who's a law professor, who says all over the country to turn immediately to the courts in an effort to secure a preliminary injunction to stop this, to prevent the CDC from doing what it's doing. U.S. District Judge Dabney Friedrich in May stated that the CDC exceeds its power under the law. We have judges, lawyers. Yes, there is a Harvard lawyer that agrees with the Biden administration. And by the way, I want to show you this again. This is, again, George Mason University. This is University of Michigan. And this is U.S. District Judge Friedrich. So, yes, the Biden administration has one professor of law at Harvard University. Not exactly the bastion of neutrality in the United States, who says, yes, this is worth trying. Not that it's legal, not that it's okay, but this is a delaying action to give them time to do more of whatever it is that the squad, that the Democratic Socialists want to see happen in the United States. I tell you this, it doesn't matter. The fact is they are destroying the United States. The Supreme Court doesn't matter anymore. And what else matters? If the executive branch and the legislative branch can do whatever they want, and the Supreme Court doesn't matter, that they can just break the law when they want to, what law actually matters? What can't the government do? Martial law? Coming into your homes, taking your property? Evicting people when they want to? Sending people because you don't have a vaccine passport, you're going to be put into concentration camps? I mean, yeah, there's conspiracy theories, but why can't it happen? If the government has more power and they can create laws at a whim from any agency beyond the power that they actually have and ignore the different branches of the government, why can't the executive just pass laws and just do whatever it wants? And you will suffer. There has been no greater threat in the last 15 years to the United States government than what we are seeing right now. That Joe Biden has willfully acknowledged that he is going to break the law because of political whims of a minority of the American people. I understand the Biden administration failed. Congress failed. The United States government failed the American people. and allowed an eviction crisis they knew about from November of 2020 to reach a point where it is today. That is still not an excuse, although they are using it as an excuse to break the country. Perhaps you think I'm overestimating this. Maybe you don't think this is as important as it is. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think there's other sources that explain this, that say, well, no, it's okay, because we've seen this happen before, where the government breaks the law willfully, where agencies that have no power of law are suddenly creating law. Perhaps you think that, well, it's a pandemic, so the laws no longer apply. And I would ask you, show me where it says that in the Constitution. Show me what law actually says that a pandemic overrides your rights, your freedoms, for you, your children, in perpetuity. Because there is no point in the future that this ends at. If they can do that today, they can do it forever. They can do it on anything. We made that same argument back in 2010 when we were talking about Obamacare. And we said, if the government is allowed to micromanage our health care, what can't they do? If they can force you to do one thing, they can force you to do anything. Here we are, 2021, 11 years later, and the government is telling us that they can do anything. If you agree with it, speak up. If you disagree with it, speak up. Because if we don't start saying something now, we're not going to be able to say something in the future. But we look forward to hearing what you have to say. We look forward to seeing you join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have found this to be informative, interesting, please like and share. Most of all, please subscribe so that we can reach more and more people through the algorithms that the internet overlords use against us. To have more people speak on this, to be informed, and to share their point of view. I thank you for taking the time to hear us today, and we hope that tomorrow will be better.